All right, class. Today we're going to be discussing aspects of graphing. Now, one reason why I want to be particular about this lecture, well, one, before I get into that, this will actually be our last lecture. I'm going to combine both the basic charting as well as advanced charting in today's lecture. The reason being is because I have to prepare your guys' final exam for next week because of the graduating seniors who need to have their grades in early. So rather than making it difficult, I'm just going to lump everybody into one. So this will be our last lecture. But like I was saying, visual representation of your data is probably one of the best or the most important things of this class. The reason being, as you guys go through graduate school, or if you do, or for those of you who become into the sports world, there's a saying, a picture paints 1,000 words. And how true is that really? That is particularly true. A lot of times you're going to be talking to the lay person, meaning that they don't have the same type of training that you guys have had interpreting data and so forth. One of the principles of the scientific method is what we call parsimony. And parsimony means the simplest form, right? Don't make things complex. You always want to make it very simple so that people can understand and be able to use that information. Now, a lot of times, scientists like myself or researchers, we will read into the fine lines with researchers, within the research. However, if you're a practitioner, you can basically get the information just by looking at a graph alone. And that's why visual representation is so important. And I want to discuss mainly a couple different visual representations that you'll see in the scientific literature. But later on, I'm going to do practical ways that some of you guys can use to display data that's not so much scientific per se. That's stuff you can report to, say, coaches. If any of you guys go into personal training, maybe you're a performance coach, you need to give this data to your head coach, and so forth. But first thing I want to point out is the APA format. Okay. Now let's just take a look at this PowerPoint slide. Notice how simple this graph is. It has a legend and there's two columns there. This is what we refer to as a column chart, or some people refer to it as a bar chart. You have two series of data, an x-axis label and a y-axis label. Bar charts, or I'm sorry, column charts are a great way to show pre and post changes between groups, right? Typically limited to just two variables or one or two variables or just 2 time points. Another way you could do that is you can have a number of different variables, such as this, or maybe one variable with multiple levels, such as this case, again with only 2 time points. And the reason being is that because these kind of charts are very simple and easy to look at. And as you can tell here, you can get a great example of the data being presented. And we're going to discuss some aspects of that in a little bit. Now, the next type of graph that we will be discussing today is a line graph. Now, a line graph is typically best used for showing trends of data over time. And the great thing about line graphs, it makes a clear representation of how data or multiple groups of data can track or change over time. And again, look how simple it is. X and Y axis, simple yearly dates, and also line markers to see the differences in trends. Again, somebody who has no data representation or data analysis representation can easily see this and understand what's going on. Now, one of the last ones that you'll see mainly in the scientific literature is scatter plots. And scatter plots are ideally used for showing the relationship between variables, such as when we were doing the correlation or the multiple correlation data. And noticeably, anytime someone was jealous, it was met with a satisfaction rating over here. So you could see the general trend or the association of two different variables by using scatter plots with some kind of trend line, right? Now those are some of the basic graphs that you'll use mainly for displaying data. Now the reason why, again, I wanted to show you guys these in this particular format, because some of you may or may not know that you might want to go into research one day or to graduate school. You will need to know and be familiar with how to make these types of graphs as well as how to represent them. And in reality, it's very simple. If you just look at the graph, you could tell from the display it's very, very simple. And what I mean by that, not necessarily simple in terms of making it itself, but how it's viewed. Okay? Now, this particular graph is in what we call APA format. And APA stands for the American Psychological Association. Basically, it's the governing aspect of how you would write and display information, basically when people go into scientific writing. You also might know something called the MLA, but typically APA is what we use. Now, there isn't necessarily a specific guideline for how visual representation is dictated, except for the color scheme. And some APA formats will actually outline how they would like their representation. But there are some principles that you need to know. Okay, for one, never use 3D graphs. Like I said before, simple is better. Back in the 90s, when computers started to get more complex, people started using 3D graphs to show information. And what happened was they really convoluted data, and it was very hard to see. So that's one thing. Never use 3D graphs. It just starts to become ugly and it's hard to make sense of the data. Just keep it two-dimensional and make it simple. Okay? The next thing is, do not use a lot of different color variations. Ideally, black, white, and tones of gray, or colors that create contrast amongst each other that are also easy on the eyes. You don't want a lot of colors or a lot of different color schemes, because it really makes things hard to follow. Ideally, just keep it to very, very rational, neutral, or standard colors. And lastly, I'll keep repeating myself about this, is you want to keep the graph as simple as possible, okay? And those are one things that not only for APA format, but also for reporting information to maybe, like I said, your boss, your head coach, what have you, okay? So let's actually delve into Excel and understand how we're going to do some of these things. And we're just going to start with some of the basics.